deliberately.
And yeah, and I like it, but it also, what it made me think about was the film Carmen, with and it's got some very specific jazz musical scenes, and it made me think of scenes with Pearl Bailey and Max Roach, and especially with the 50s dress and so on and so forth. You might want to take a look at that, and because it's really got some interesting echoes from that field.
Okay, definitely.
But I thought also the Native American part always comes to mind, because when in the early video, when they're in Zulu dress, and that kind of display of cultural heritage, yeah, that it really, to me, shows these sort of, I guess you'd call them, global human connections in terms of cultures and Native American culture and expression.
Yes.
So what does the word Kwaito mean or refer to?
Yeah, there's dispute about that. There's no sort of consensus. People say that it's, comes from the word kwai, which means something that's hot, or, that which is like the, but then kwai can have several other meanings, like it can refer to that which is angry. So kwai is from Afrikaans, and it's kind of was incorporated into sort of township slang of the time period. So I don't know if I can give you a specific definition, but people have said that it sort of comes from kwai. Another rumor, or I guess another origin myth, I guess, is that there was a gang called the Ama Kwaito that operated in the 1980s in Soweto, and there was some suggestion that, that they were some of the first people to kind of listen to the music and to kind of give support to Kwaito musicians, and so that the music became named after the gang, but it's unclear, and I'm not sure where, if they called themselves Ama Kwaito, they got that word Kwaito from. Yeah.
Kwaito actually refers to, for example, if you, like Americans, they listen to rap music. So Kwaito in African music is almost like African rap. So if you hear those singers perform the music, it's actually they perform about their own experiences in South Africa. So this is like a new term for.
But I disagree. It's not rap, though.
No, but
But there is a South African rap that there is South African hip hop that's very distinct from Kwaito, and South African hip hop artists are very clear about the fact that they are not Kwaito artists, and they they're very, they make a very conscious effort to sort of distinguish themselves from Kwaito artists. What I would say is similar is that Kwaito is very similar in sensibility to American hip hop.
Yeah.
As far as sort of being representative of, an experience that's coming from the township and an experience that's coming from black youth in a township. But I'm very adamant about the fact that, South African hip hoppers, people like Squatter Camp, etc., they're very clear about the fact that they don't do Kwaito. And they're very specific about the fact that, they're accessing a different kind of tradition, and that their music is much more consciously political, that their music is, they feel that they're more representing the reality of South African life, and, that they, in many ways, sort of denigrate, Kwaito as a musical and cultural form, because it's seen as being, for them, it's seen as being not as authentic and not as, expressive of the reality of life. So I just wanted to make, so I think the sensibility, yes, is definitely there.
No, yeah, I was just going to ask, just following up from this, Does that mean that the South African hip hop has different attitude? They're rejecting. Are they? You saying they're more authentic, but they're also presumably rejecting the kind of references to traditional music that Kwaito has, or how does that work?
Yes and no, it depends. I mean, the South African hip hop's genealogy is very different from that of Kwaito. So, for example, if you're looking at South African hip hop, South African hip hop really, in its sort of infancy, came from the sort of Cape Flats communities, and mixed race communities in Cape Town. And so you have people rapping in Afrikaans and English, and then also in various forms of dialect in Afrikaans. And its sort of arrival as far as like black South Africans doing hip hop was a little bit later, and it's sort of the commercialization of hip hop is definitely more of a phenomenon coming out of Johannesburg, and also coming out of rappers that are from the Johannesburg, Pretoria area. The tension is between the tension in hip hop in South Africa is between the rappers who are rapping in English, okay, and the rappers who are making a much more conscious effort to rap in African languages, whatever that African language be. In the case of the rappers that are rapping in African language, some of them are actually making very conscious decisions to incorporate traditional music. So particularly some of the rappers in Zulu, and to a lesser extent some of the ones in Swana. But they're actually really, so you hear like, for example, a Maskandi beat. So you'll hear like something like a Maskandi artist, the beat from a Maskandi artist, the sort of guitar and beat as the background track, and then the person is rapping over that in Zulu. So you will see a more, conscious effort around that, but that is not necessarily like this sort of urban syncretic tradition of Sophia Town that's being referenced. It's really literally about, referencing sort of much more older, traditions.
Okay, thanks. That whole relation is fascinating.
You made some interesting points. You said the distinction between hip-hop and South Africa. You said there's these tensions between speaking English versus an African dialect. I noticed back in America, you had this youth movement of music in response to disco, and sort of post-industrial area. In the Bronx, you had hip-hop comes about. In Detroit, we had techno with people like Derek Mays and Saunders. In Chicago, you had house, and they all responded to disco and post-industrial in different ways with different sensibilities about what type of performance you can do, even around see who you are, sexuality, and that, right?
Totally.
And so, are you finding those type of nuances within?
Completely. Yeah, and I mean completely. That's in some. My project is not about the differences between Kwaito and hip hop, but definitely, South African hip hoppers, these are all technologically driven musics, right? South African hip hoppers are definitely referencing a very different kind of performance of their gender and sexuality, their masculinity, their identities, than Kwaito artists. I would argue that Kwaito is a bit more fluid than what hip-hop has presented so far in a South African context. And then just to sort of add another confusing, monkey wrench to the whole thing is that, there is also South African house, okay, which is also something different, So, there is a South African house, and they're very clear that they're not Kwaito artists either. And that what they're doing is very distinctive, from Kwaito, and they are defining themselves in very different ways from Kwaito. I argue that with South African house, and that's not, the purview of my project, but that, there's some class positionalities going on there, and, there's, it's kind of a different, sensibility. In some ways, Kwaito opens up different things. House opens up different things that Kwaito can't. But house is, far more devoid of lyrics, than even Kwaito, And so what's being produced is much more about the sonic and how you're moving. And in the case of house, there's been sort of the rise of the DJ, as the centerpiece of the, the DJ as the celebrity, the DJ as